Aloha and welcome to the 40th annual Hawaii International Film Festival presented by Halakalani and to our discussion today with Norris Wong, director of My Prince Edward. We'd like to extend our thanks to the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office of San Francisco for sponsoring this screening, as well as our spotlight on Hong Kong. My name's Duncan Kayard and it's a pleasure to introduce our film tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Hawaii is an Indigenous space whose people are originally today identified as Native Hawaiians. I'm calling in from Melbourne in Australia on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. A few quick housekeeping matters before we dig in. First off, make sure that you check out our program updates for the most up-to-date information on additions to our program, as well as a full schedule of films, talks and Q&As. So check out HIFF40. And make sure that you fill out our Audience Award voting. If you enjoyed My Prince Edward as much as I did, then feel free to vote as well for our Hawaii News Now Audience Award. Just visit hawaiinewsnow.com/HIFF to cast your vote for your favourite narrative, documentary and short film. But with all of that done, I'd like to welcome Norris and thank you so much for coming. I really enjoyed this film and I thought that it was such a beautiful portrait of Hong Kong. So thank you so much for making it.
Thank you too. Thank you for enjoying it. Thank you for the conversation.
To begin, I'm wondering, what was your inspiration for making this film?
Oh, well, I'll answer it in my native Cantonese, and then Felix, my distributor, will help me to translate it. 一開始點解會拍呢個關於Prince Edward 嘅故仔啦？就係喺嗰個區域嗰度長大啦。咁所以咧自己一路睇住呢個商場，就覺得好有趣，都係賣一啲結婚用品嘅商場。咁就想用呢個商場去做一個關於婚姻嘅故事。
So Norris grew up in the Prince Edward district, actually just right across from the Golden Plaza, which is the main sort of place that this film takes place in. And watching as time goes by, she watches this place, and there's a lot of stories happening, and it's very interesting because it's a place that sells wedding goods, and so she thought that writing a story about marriage would be suitable.
So, as I understand it, this was your first film?
Yes, it's my first feature film.
What was it like directing your first feature film?
因為今次呢個係由香港嘅電影發展基金去 fund 嘅啦，咁就有325萬，但係呢個 budget 係低，但係個好處就係我哋係一個 grant 嚟嘅，唔需要去還錢，咁所以就比較大嘅自由度去拍呢個戲啦。咁所以都可以講到啲好 personal 嘅故仔，所以個經驗係好開心嘅。
So this film is actually funded by the First Feature Film Initiative by the Hong Kong government. It's by the Film Development Fund in the Hong Kong government, and she was granted 3.25 million Hong Kong dollars, which is actually not that much at all. It's a very low indie budget, but the good thing is that there's no sort of pressure of having to pay back investors because it's a grant, and so she was able to tell a very personal story that's very small and contained, and all in all, it was a great experience.
You mentioned that it was a personal story and that you grew up in Prince Edward seeing these bridal stores. Is that story in any way personal to you? What really made you want to make this film about engagement and marriage?
因為我寫呢個script 嘅時候咧，就係啱啱30歲嘅生日啦。咁自己都面對一個係咪需要同男朋友結婚嘅問題。咁就其實裏邊除咗解結婚嘅情節咧，好多都係我真實嘅經驗。
So she wrote the script when she turned 30. And that's a sort of a turning point for her, whether she wants to marry her boyfriend or not. And so this sort of inspired her to write the story. And besides the sham marriage element of the film, a lot of the incidents are actually based on her real life experiences.
I was wondering how similar this film was to your personal experiences. So that's a really interesting thing to hear. I'm wondering, so much of the film is thematically about freedom, freedom from family commitments, from relationships, but also freedom from our past. I'm wondering, would you be able to speak a little more to why you wanted to make a film in which freedom was such an important part?
因為本身係諗住講marriage 嘅呢個主題，咁好多時候我哋喺香港一講結婚咧，就會諗起失去自由，直情係有個 idiom 係講話你結咗婚咧就會被困啦咁樣。咁於是我好快就會將 marriage 同 freedom 呢個題目係連埋啦。咁加上我揀咗假結婚呢件事，咁亦都係會涉及關於身份嘅自由咯，即係出入境嘅自由。
When she decided on the theme of marriage, there's actually a great tie between freedom and marriage, because there's actually a saying in Hong Kong where when you get married, you would lose your freedom. It's sort of like a saying. And so the notion of marriage and freedom are very connected in her mind. And also the notion of sham marriage would also speak to the notion of identity, cultural identity, and also freedom as well.
I suppose on that note of cultural identity, I really can't imagine this film in anywhere except Hong Kong. The small apartments, the way that generations coexist within these small spaces is so tied to this place of Hong Kong. So I'm wondering, what did it mean to you to shoot this film in Hong Kong? And were there any other cultural elements or any other cultural background which guided your creation of this film?
其實因為頭先講過話係比較 personal 嘅故仔啦，咁所以其實如果係 local 嘅 audience 咧，佢哋就好容易會睇到裏邊有好多其實係嗰個 district 裏邊係比較出名嘅地方，譬如有金魚街啦，就係賣好多水族嘅地方。另外都係頭先講Golden Plaza 啦，賣婚紗嘅地方，又有好多公園啊之類。咁其實好多都係我成長嘅環境。咁所以咧，我覺得呢套戲，所以英文名叫 My Prince Edward， 其實都係對於我自己嘅一個記錄咁樣。
And so this, as she said before, this is a very personal story, and local audiences can tell that all of it was shot on location in Prince Edward. A lot of the parks, the streets, especially the street where they sell a lot of fish, and of course Golden Plaza with the bridal shops, and everything was shot on a location. And the fact that she grew up in this area is actually reflective on the English title of this film, which is My Prince Edward, because she feels like this is part of her being.
It's when I first saw the film's title, I was really surprised, and I don't think I fully understood those meanings. But now that you've described that story of My Prince Edward, that it's both about the husband in the film, but also is sort of an autobiographical statement about you, and that this is your Prince Edward in your film. I think that that makes it really profound. The first moments of the film, your main character rescues an upside down turtle, and then that turtle recurs across the rest of the film. I'm wondering, what did that turtle symbolize for you, or why did you want to start with that?
嗰個烏龜咧，其實就 係好代表到主角佢本身啦，因為頭先講過話有條街係賣好多魚嘅，咁裏邊亦都好多烏龜可以賣，咁個感覺就係佢哋喺嗰個透明膠袋嗰度咧，就好似香港人住喺一個好窄嘅環境咁樣，所以係一個即係主角自己嘅metaphor 嚟。
So the turtle actually acts as a metaphor for the protagonist, the female protagonist of the film, and because it also reflects the street where they sell a lot of aquatic animals like fish and turtles and everything, and they all come in little plastic bags, and that also sort of symbolizes and it's a metaphor for the Hong Kong people living in such a confined space.
To sort of wrap up, you made this really beautiful personal film as your first film, and it's almost surprising to hear that you were able to make such a wonderful film on the first shot. I'm wondering, do you have any advice for young filmmakers in Hong Kong, particularly young women filmmakers in Hong Kong, on how to tell their stories through film?
我自己個感覺就係只要你係好想講一啲personal 啲嘅故仔咧，你就可以用你嘅對於電影嘅認識，即係無論係 visual 上面啦，喺 music 上面啦，或者係喺 storytelling 上面，可以用一啲 creative 啲嘅方法雖然未必我哋有好大嘅 budget 啦，但係因為first film 我會覺得係比較冇壓力嘅，所以我覺得個自由度會大啲嘅，咁所以就覺得可以勇敢啲去試一啲唔同嘅嘢。
She would say that for any type of young filmmaker or first-time filmmaker to tell a very personal story, and through their own knowledge of film, whether that's through visual storytelling or music, to think of creative ways to make your film different. And a lot of times young first-time filmmakers don't work with such big budgets. And so that actually, don't think of that as a restriction, but think of that as you don't have as much pressure in terms of recouping the money. And so try to be bold and try something different.
It's really good advice. I'm wondering, just to finish off, what are you working on next? What does the future hold for you as a filmmaker?
我其實下一個電影都已經有一個 offer 啦，就係都係 Create Hong Kong 即係 Film Development Fund 嘅一個新嘅 scheme 啦。嗰個就叫做Director Succession Scheme， 就係一個比較出名嘅導演去做監製，然後帶領嘅新導演。咁我監製就係Maple 張，就張婉婷。咁我哋嚟緊呢套戲都會係講關於一啲relationship 啦，同埋係一啲香港人嘅身份問題。
So basically, she's already writing her next film, and her next film is also funded by the Film Development Fund of Hong Kong under the Director Succession Scheme, and that's where they get a sort of very well-established director to produce films of younger filmmakers. And so her producer is Mabel Chung, who's a very prolific director from Hong Kong, and they are together creating a story, and it's about interpersonal relationships, and also sort of Hong Kong identity and Hong Kong people's struggle of that identity. And so they're working on that now.
Well, thank you so much for making time to discuss this really wonderful film and your process as well. Hong Kong is making such exciting, important film at the moment, and it's really, really exciting to see that the next generation of filmmakers are telling these personal stories that are so important. So thank you so much, Norris, for speaking with us today.
Thank you for your time.
Just to round things off for today, thank you so much for participating in our Q&A today. I'd like to thank Norris for joining us tonight, for Felix for translating, and to the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office of San Francisco for sponsoring this screening. A special mahalo to our HIFF sponsors, our board of directors, and to our HIFF Ohana members. One final thing. If you're able to, please consider donating to the HIFF40 for 40 fundraising campaign. Every dollar counts towards not only keeping HIFF online to help us present films around the world, but also to build our program and to make it bigger and better in the future. You can learn more at hiff.org/40 for 40. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Mahalo and have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Bye.